She gave away her only meal to a silent beggar, not knowing what it would change. The plate was warm against Amara Lewis's palms, the heat rising into her fingers as if reminding her that this food still belonged to her. Rice, carefully measured. Stew, stretched thin so it could last. It was supposed to quiet the hunger until nightfall. Nothing more. But then there was the silent beggar. He sat a little away from the roadside noise, not blocking anyone's path, not holding a cup, not lifting a sign. An older man, skin lined by years that had not been kind, clothes worn but clean enough to show effort. His back was straight. His hands rested on his knees. He did not speak. He did not beg. Amara noticed him because he did not ask. Their eyes met for half a second. His were steady, dark, observant. Not desperate. Not pleading. Just present. She slowed without meaning to. Her stomach tightened, sharper now as if it sensed danger. She had planned this meal. She always planned. Ever since her mother's death, planning had been the difference between coping and collapsing. You plan meals. You plan bills. You plan grief, so it doesn't swallow you whole. Never give away what you can't replace, her aunt had warned after the funeral, pressing a folded note into Amara's hand. Kindness doesn't pay rent. Amara had nodded then. She always nodded. But another voice pushed forward, quieter, older. If you ever help someone, don't wait until it's easy, her mother had said years ago, crouched in their small kitchen, dividing one plate into 2 uneven portions. Easy kindness isn't kindness. It's convenience. Amara stopped walking. The silent beggar lowered his gaze, as if already expecting her to pass. That was what everyone did. They passed. She stood there too long. Long enough for the moment to harden. Before she could think herself out of it, she stepped closer. For you, she said softly, bending forward and extending the plate with both hands. The silent beggar looked at the food, then at her face. Confusion flickered, followed by something heavier. Caution. Pride. He did not reach immediately. His silence stretched, thick enough to make Amara's throat tighten. Her stomach growled, loud and traitorous. He heard it. The silent beggar's eyes lifted again, sharper now, searching her expression as if testing whether this was a performance. Whether someone would laugh. Film. Withdraw the plate. Amara didn't flinch. Slowly, he accepted the food with both hands. His fingers brushed hers, rough and warm, grounding. He nodded once. Thank you, he said, his voice low, unused, almost careful. She smiled, small and sincere, and stepped back before regret could catch her. She turned away quickly, not trusting herself to linger. Behind her, the silent beggar watched her leave, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though something he hadn't expected had just confirmed a thought he'd been carrying for a long time. Amara walked on with empty hands and a tighter hunger, unaware that she had just crossed an invisible line. She did not know who he was. She did not know what that meal would change. She did not know that this moment would come back for her. Hunger had been part of Amara's life long before that roadside. It wasn't the dramatic kind people talked about. It didn't knock dishes off tables or make her faint in public. It was quieter, a dull companion that sat with her through long hours and whispered reminders of what she could not afford to forget. She learned it young. In flashes, memories returned to her as she walked home that day with an empty stomach. Her mother at the stove, stirring a pot that was never full enough. The way she would taste the food first, then smile and say she wasn't hungry. The way Amara later realized the lie had been rehearsed. After her mother died, planning became survival. Amara planned meals down to spoonfuls. She planned bus fares. She planned how often she could call her younger brother, Daniel, without reminding him too much of what she carried alone. That was why the silent beggar unsettled her. That night, lying on her narrow bed, she replayed the moment again and again. The steadiness of his hands, the way he hadn't rushed to eat. Most people who were starving ate like time was chasing them. He hadn't. Her stomach twisted, half hunger, half something else she couldn't name. She rolled onto her side and stared at the wall until sleep came in pieces. In one dream, she stood in her childhood kitchen again. Her mother divided a plate, paused, then slid the larger portion toward Amara. When Amara protested, her mother only said, "One day, someone will give without knowing why. Remember how that feels." Amara woke before dawn, unsettled. The next few days passed with no sign of the silent beggar. The roadside was the same, but the space where he had sat felt oddly noticeable, like a chair pulled away from a table. At the cafe, small things began to shift. A customer, she barely remembered, left a tip larger than usual. Another asked her name and thanked her twice for refilling a cup she had already refilled. Once, she caught a man watching her from the corner table, his gaze thoughtful rather than familiar. When their eyes met, he looked away. She told herself it meant nothing. But foreshadowing has a way of brushing past logic. One evening, as she closed up the cafe, she found a wallet on the counter. Thick leather. Heavy. She held it for a moment longer than necessary, feeling its weight. There was a strange familiarity in it, though she had never owned anything like it. She didn't open it. When the owner returned, breathless and relieved, he thanked her, paused, and studied her face. "Integrity shows," he said almost to himself. That night, Amara counted her tips twice. Something felt off. Not wrong. Just tilted. Then she saw the silent beggar again. He sat in the same place, cleaner now, his clothes still worn but pressed. When he noticed her, he nodded, the same quiet acknowledgement as before. She approached cautiously. "You're back," she said. "So are you," he replied. They spoke only a little. His name was Henry. He offered nothing else. No past. No request. Just presence. Before she left, he said something that stayed with her. "Some choices echo," he said, "even when the person making them walks away." Amara laughed lightly, unsure why her chest tightened. She didn't realize then that echoes were already forming. Henry noticed patterns most people ignored. He noticed how some faces changed when they thought no one was looking. How voices softened around children and hardened around money. How kindness often arrived only after recognition. That was why he had chosen silence. For over a year, Henry Cole had lived stripped of names and expectations. No assistants. No drivers. No introductions that carried weight before he spoke. He wanted to see the world as it treated those it believed had nothing to offer. The roadside was intentional. So was the stillness. He never asked for food because asking changed the test. People responded to requests differently than they responded to need. Need observed freely revealed character. When Amara stopped, he noticed immediately. Not because she was unusual, but because she hesitated. Most people didn't. Her eyes flicked to the plate, then to his face, then away, as if arguing with herself. Henry had seen that look before in boardrooms, people weighing cost against conscience. The difference was that in boardrooms, the cost was abstract. For her, it was hunger. When she offered the plate, Henry almost refused. Not out of pride, but out of clarity. If she was performing, he didn't want it. If she was uncertain, he didn't want to corner her. But she didn't rush. She didn't smile too wide. She didn't explain herself. She just stood there. That told him everything. Over the following weeks, Henry watched quietly. He noticed how Amara returned to the cafe after long shifts without complaining. How she redirected customers who snapped rather than escalating. How she walked past the roadside without ever looking back at him, as though the act itself was complete. No expectation. No monitoring. He had not planned to involve her. He rarely involved anyone. But he began to adjust routes, timing his days so he would cross her path again. When they spoke, he spoke little. He tested nothing obvious. He simply observed. And then came the call. Henry sat at the long table days later, documents neatly aligned, his reflection sharp in the glass wall. Wealth had returned to him like a tailored suit, familiar, heavy. Across from him, Margaret Collins prepared the file. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "She fits none of the usual profiles." "That's the point," Henry replied. Margaret hesitated. "You're changing the structure." "Yes." "You're anchoring it to a single moment." "No," Henry said, his voice calm. "I'm anchoring it to a pattern revealed by a moment." He remembered the warmth of the plate, the way she had looked away first. That was what stayed. When Amara's name appeared on the screen later that day, Henry exhaled slowly. This was the risk. Not of exposure, but of disappointment. People changed when confronted with scale. He wondered if she would still look at him the same way. Outside the glass walls, the city moved, unaware that something quiet was aligning. Henry did not know whether she would come, but he knew that if she did, the story would move forward. Amara almost didn't go. The address Margaret had given her sat in her phone like a dare. Glass. Security. Distance from anything that resembled her life. She changed clothes twice, then stopped, choosing the simple dress she wore to work. No costume. No apology. As she entered the building, her footsteps echoed louder than they should have. The lobby smelled of polish and quiet money. She felt suddenly aware of her hands, her posture, the way she carried herself when she had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. The room opened into light. Henry sat at the far end of the table. For a split second, Amara did not recognize him. Then she did. The posture, the eyes, the silence that filled space without demanding it. Her breath caught. "Henry," she asked. He smiled gently. "Thank you for coming." Margaret began explaining, but Amara barely heard the words at first. Shareholder. Foundation. Observation period. Each term landed slowly, rearranging her understanding of every small moment that had preceded this one. She remembered the wallet at the cafe, the man who had watched her, the unexpected generosity that had followed her since that day on the roadside. It wasn't coincidence. "I didn't know," Amara said quietly when Margaret finished. "I know," Henry replied. That was the point. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. "Why me?" Amara asked. Henry leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "Because you gave without checking the price." Her throat tightened. "I was hungry," she said. "I still am sometimes." He nodded. "So was I." That was when it shifted from explanation to understanding. Henry spoke then of his mother, briefly. How she had taught him to notice who gave quietly. How she had died before seeing what wealth did to people who forgot where it came from. Amara saw her own mother in that admission. The kitchens, the divided plates, the lies wrapped in love. "This isn't a reward," Henry said carefully. "It's a responsibility. I'm changing the way resources move. I want people involved who won't confuse scale with meaning." Amara listened, but her thoughts drifted to Daniel, to the cafe, to the silent calculations she made every day. "You didn't ask if I wanted this," she said. Henry met her gaze. "I'm asking now." She looked down at her hands, remembering how they had felt empty that afternoon. How complete the moment had been anyway. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "it won't be public. It won't be loud." Henry smiled, something like relief crossing his face. "Then we agree already." As Amara stood to leave, Margaret slid one final document forward. "You should know," she said gently. "That moment you remember? It redirected more than you think." Amara paused. "How much?" she asked. Margaret hesitated, then answered honestly. "Everything." Amara stepped back into the street a long time later, the city unchanged but her footing uncertain. She had crossed another invisible line. Amara's life did not transform overnight. The world outside her apartment windows remained loud, demanding, indifferent. Yet, inside her routines, subtle shifts began to echo, carrying weight she had not expected. Daniel's scholarship arrived, fully covering his final year of school. The cafe, which she had managed alone during late nights, expanded to a neighboring block. Regulars noticed a new calm in her service, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She had not changed in ambition. She had only changed in how the world seemed to respond to her choices. Yet, her thoughts kept returning to that roadside, the silent beggar, the single plate of rice and stew, the warmth of his hands brushing hers. The memory was vivid, sharper than any dream, as if time itself had marked it. She began to notice patterns everywhere. The strangers who held doors open, small gestures of trust from people she barely knew. Letters that arrived with subtle kindnesses, unexpected recommendations, opportunities she had not sought. They were all connected, like threads pulled from a single fabric. And then there was Henry. He began leaving small notes at the cafe. Never signed, never intrusive. Suggestions for community programs. A tip for a better route to reach someone in need. Quiet guidance, the kind that felt almost invisible but substantial. Amara wondered how he knew, how he could move through her life with such precision and remain unseen. She couldn't shake the feeling that the same quiet dignity she had seen in him that day had not left. It was simply operating under different rules now. One evening, she stood at the roadside again. The space was empty. No Henry, no rush of cars in the near distance. Yet the memory of the plate, the silent exchange, pressed into her chest. Hunger still lived there. Yes, but it had shifted. It had become a measure of something larger. Empathy, attention, quiet courage. Her mind wandered backward. She remembered her mother, divided plates, lessons of generosity learned in scarcity. Her father, pretending not to be hungry, yet ensuring she had bread each morning. Each moment of foreshadowing, each act preparing her for this day. She had always carried it unknowingly. The streetlights flickered as dusk approached. For a fleeting second, she imagined Henry stepping forward, nodding as he had, silently approving the path she had taken. It was strange to realize how one choice, a single plate of food given without expectation, had rippled through months, nudging events, shaping lives in invisible ways. Amara's own hand reached to her pocket, brushing against a small folded note she had not noticed before. No signature. The words simply said, "You saw me when no one else did. That is why you were chosen." She pressed it to her chest, her heartbeat matching the rhythm of the city. It was all interconnected now. The silent beggar, her hunger, the generosity, the unexpected openings in her life. Each moment became a link in a chain she had not realized she was forging. That night, she slept with a strange sense of peace. The echoes of one choice were loud in her heart, carrying lessons she could not yet articulate, but would one day share. And somewhere, unseen, Henry watched, knowing the first ripple had grown into a quiet current capable of carrying much more than a single meal. The morning sunlight spilled across the city in golden streaks, painting streets and rooftops in warmth. Amara stepped out of her apartment, carrying a small folder of documents, plans for community programs, schedules for local feeding initiatives, and notes from the quiet instructions Henry had left her over the months. The city smelled of dust, street food, and possibility. It smelled like home. She walked the familiar route to the cafe, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baking bread welcomed her. Daniel waved from behind the counter, his scholarship success, now a bright beacon of hope in both their lives. Amara smiled, knowing that every small victory traced back to the moment she had given away her only meal to the silent beggar. The street felt alive in ways she had never noticed before. Strangers exchanged glances of mutual respect. Vendors offered her a nod instead of a hurried sales pitch. Children ran past with laughter that felt softer, freer. Somewhere in the folds of the city, the quiet kindness she had shown was echoing outward, shaping reality in subtle, miraculous ways. She approached the roadside where it all had begun, the spot where Henry had first sat, waiting silently, teaching her the value of giving without expectation. The memory was vivid. His steady eyes, the careful way he accepted the plate, the warmth of his hands brushing hers for a fraction of a second. She lowered her gaze, almost expecting to see him, but the place was empty. And yet, the emptiness was filled with the weight of what had been set in motion. Henry's influence had been invisible but transformative. Programs that would feed hundreds were now in her care, guided by the same principles of dignity and discretion that he had embodied. Every decision she made carried his silent approval, every initiative a testament to one act of selfless courage. She sat on the curb for a moment, feeling the pulse of the city beneath her feet. The memory of that first encounter with Henry, then only a silent beggar, felt both distant and immediate. It was a reminder of how fragile and powerful one choice could be. Then, as if summoned by the gravity of that thought, she saw him across the street. Henry stood quietly, unassuming in the sun, dressed now not as a beggar but as the man he truly was. Their eyes met, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. The understanding was complete. He had tested no one, judged no one. The measure of change had been hers, all along. Amara stood, straightened her shoulders, and walked past him without a word. No explanations were needed, the impact had already been made. Every life touched, every opportunity created, every ripple that had formed in her world and beyond carried the weight of that single plate of food. Later, when Daniel asked her why she had never mentioned the man again, she only smiled. "Some lessons," she said softly, "are meant to be lived, not explained." That night, she lay in bed, the quiet of the room full of reflection. The hunger that had once defined her existence was no longer a burden. It had become a reminder of empathy, of courage, of how one person's willingness to act without expectation could ignite change far beyond imagination. The silent beggar, the only meal the city that had watched, everything had shifted in ways she could never fully articulate. But she felt it, deep in her chest. A pulse of possibility, a legacy of compassion that would continue long after the plate had been empty. Amara closed her eyes, finally at peace, knowing she had witnessed the full measure of change born from the simplest act of giving. And somewhere, Henry smiled, content that the quiet seed he had observed had grown into a force neither of them could have predicted, but one that would endure.